Buenas noches a todos, buenas noches Piotr, muchas gracias por haber aceptado la invitación de JCall Barcelona para participar en este evento. Bueno, soy Daniela Rosenfeld, entre otras cosas directora del Festival de Cine Judío de Barcelona y también miembro de JCall. En primer lugar, queremos agradecer a la Editorial Afers y a Vicent Olmos por la edición catalana de Mauvais, Juïf y a la traductora Susana Fosc. En principio, Vicent Olmos iba a estar con nosotros, pero ha habido un pequeño accidente en la familia y a último momento pues, no ha podido estar. La Editorial Afers es una editorial que tiene la sede en el País Valencià. Está fundada por el historiador Vicent Olmos, que desgraciadamente no puede estar por nosotros. Y el eje que vertebra la labor de Afers podríamos decir que es una reflexión crítica sobre el nacionalismo y las cuestiones identitarias. Mal jueu, el libro que presentamos hoy de Piotr Smolar, se ha publicado en febrero del 2021, juntamente con Espurna, de Xavier Serra. Son los títulos que inauguran la colección de narrativa de Afers, que continúa con esta línea editorial. Mauvais Juïf se escribió originalmente y se editó originalmente en francés en el año 2019 y se ha traducido al polaco y al catalán. Y por otro lado, pues creemos que sería interesante, si alguien se anima, si hay alguien entre el público o alguien sabe, creemos que podría ser muy interesante una traducción al español también. Invitamos a todos los que se animen a que se animen. Ahora presentamos a Piotr Smolar. Piotr Smolar nació en 1974 en Francia, es de padres polacos, nacido, de padres polacos, de familia polaca. Es diplomado en el Centro de Formación de Periodistas de París, después de haber cursado estudios de historias en la Sorbona. Vivió 4 años en Rusia entre 1997 y 2001 y escribe su primer libro como resultado de esta experiencia, Globlinka, Paseos por el corazón de Rusia. En 2002 empieza a trabajar para el periódico Le Monde, donde se ocupa durante 5 años de temas de seguridad y terrorismo. De 2007 a 2014 se encarga de la cobertura del espacio post-soviético y los Balcanes en el Departamento Internacional de Le Monde. Y de 2014 a 2019 fue corresponsal en Jerusalén para el mismo periódico. Desde 2019 está a cargo de cuestiones diplomáticas. También en el 2019 publicó su segundo libro, Mauvais, Juïf, y por lo que nos acabamos de enterar, pues de aquí a nada va a Washington también con Le Monde. Bueno, pues ahora paso la palabra a Jonas, Benarroch y a Piotr Smolar, que realmente son los protagonistas del evento. Gracias, buenas noches.
Buenas tardes a todos. ¿Se me oye? Sí. Vale. Muchas gracias a todos por venir. Muchas gracias especialmente a Piotr Smolar. Me hace particular ilusión tenerlo aquí porque he leído con mucho interés su libro. Yo diría que Piotr es para digamos, retratar rápidamente a Piotr Smolar es un periodista de matices. En una época en donde el pensamiento es muy de blanco y negro, él parece como defender directamente el matiz y esto para mí es agradecer, honestamente, porque es estimulantemente, es muy interesante, muy inspirador, intelectualmente, digo. Voy a empezar con las preguntas. Empiezo, Piotr. Su libro es muy coral, da voz a muchos personajes y permite confrontar muchos puntos de vista. Pero en resumen se trata de una indagación de la identidad judía contemporánea y particularmente de su propia identidad judía. En una entrevista que le hicieron en France Inter, usted hizo redactar una presentación de su libro con las siguientes palabras. 3 generaciones de periodistas, Hersch Smolar, Alexander Smolar, Piotr Smolar. 3 plumas. 3 destinos confrontados a las múltiples resurgencias del antisemitismo por un lado y al endurecimiento identitario de Israel por el otro. Ser judío en Polonia, ser judío en Francia, ser judío en Israel, ser judío sin más. ¿Se es judío si uno no se siente judío? ¿Podemos no sentirnos judíos cuando las generaciones que nos han precedido lo han pagado con su sangre o con su libertad? ¿Qué es ser judío? que es ser un mal judío. ¿Qué motivos, Piotr, hay detrás de este título un poco provocador?
Thank you, Jonas, for this question. First, let me say 2 or 3 things. I want to thank you for your invitation, and it's with a heavy heart that I speak to you only through video. I would have loved to come and meet you all in person, and I think that the conversation would have been even much warmer and more direct, and I really regret it. I'm also very honored by the fact that my book was translated in Catalan, and it's really, for me, it's something very moving, very touching. I'm not just saying this out of politeness. It's true. It's something for me really, really special, and I'm very frustrated by the fact that I cannot meet readers, people interested in this subject, and hear their own thoughts and their own experience. That being said, regarding your question, yes, the title was provocative, and it's not my publisher's choice, it's my choice. So the responsibility is 100% mine. Why did I choose this title? First, because it's a good start for a conversation. Because you asked me the question, so it shows that it's a good title. Second, after this half joke, I would say that it's an admission of my ignorance. I am the bad Jew, of course, to start with. I am the bad Jew because I was raised in a family, as many other Jewish families in this part of Europe, in which there was no real heritage, no real transmission of cultural Jewishness or religion. I never learned the language, and by language I mean Yiddish or Hebrew. I didn't learn about religion. I didn't learn about specific Jewish writers or about even the Jewish holidays, the Jewish calendar, nothing. So I am the bad Jew by transmission, in a way. I'm also a bad Jew because I didn't show any real interest before for a long time for those issues, for those questions. And in a way, I waited until I read my grandfather's book while I was living in Russia between 97 and 2001. I then discovered my grandfather's book about the Minsk ghetto, and it was, for me personally, it was really like a slap in the face. I knew my grandfather when he was alive. He died when I was around 13, 14, but I never had a proper conversation with him about where he came from, who he was. He was a fired up communist, very passionate, blind ideologically, but he was also a hero in the Minsk ghetto. And so when I discovered this, it really opened up a new horizon for me of things that I should learn. And when I moved to Israel years after, in 2014, then I had the idea that I should, in a way, build a bridge between the past and the present, between his experience in the Minsk ghetto and as a fired up communist, and my own experience while working and living in Israel as a correspondent. And on that bridge stood also my father, with his own experience as a dissident who was forced to move out of Poland with a heavy heart. And so I am the bad Jew, to answer your question, but the title is also a sort of melancholic reference to the evolution of the world today, and to this dreadful tendency identity assignment, if you will, that everyone has to define himself in a very, very restrictive and narrow way. You should be either this or that. You should belong to this camp or to this camp. You should define yourself only by your sexual orientation, by the color of your skin, or by your political affiliation. And I always felt very uncomfortable with this tendency, because I don't like restrictive identities. I don't feel comfortable with them. I respect the fact that everyone has the right to define himself as he wishes, but personally, I don't feel comfortable with that. And so there is this tendency right now, and coming back to the title that you mentioned, there's a tendency right now in Israel with the Israeli right to say to the Jewish diaspora, you're either with us or against us. Israel is your home. Israel is the home of the Jewish people. You cannot criticize Israel because otherwise you betray your family. And again, I don't feel comfortable with this. I think that every Jew of the world has his own identity and defines himself as he wishes, and that he should be able to say that the political orientation of Israel and the identity fever that Israel is going through for the last years is worrying, and for very good reasons. And it doesn't mean that you deny the right of Israel to exist, and it doesn't mean that you are against Israel. It's just that you feel concerned about its future. Sorry for this very long answer.
No, me parece estupenda la respuesta, porque trata mucho de los temas. Perdón. Y me parece muy interesante tu respuesta. Agradezco que sea larga y que explique elementos tanto sentimentales como políticos, ¿no? Respecto a esto último que hablábamos, tienes una frase que decía, en tu libro la tienes, dice, ser mal judío, implica una especie de traición de una promesa que nunca se ha formulado claramente. Yo creo que el título mal judío está relacionado con esa especie de traición de la que hablas, y suponemos que hace referencia a los reproches que recibiste en tus artículos de Le Monde mientras eras corresponsal en Jerusalén. Cuentas que incluso tus propios padres, que no tenían un especial vínculo sentimental con Israel, como veremos más adelante esto, te llegaron a reprochar la falta de empatía de tus reportajes. Háblanos de lo que escribías en Le Monde mientras estabas en Jerusalén.
Okay, so I have to say a few things about this. First, Le Monde has had correspondence in Israel for decades. And I think that about almost every one of those correspondents has been criticized. It's just the way it goes. We are an independent center, let's say center-left, independent, moderate newspaper with a deep sense of, I think, of humanism, and we are very, very concerned by human rights wherever they are. So criticism against Le Monde's correspondent in Israel have always existed. The thing is that they might have been stronger against me for several reasons. First, I have to tell you, and I explained this in the book, that I hid the fact that I had Jewish origins while living in Israel. I never spoke about it. I decided to hide those origins for different reasons. If you're interested, I will tell you about it later. But so I decided to hide those origins. So the criticism against me was not a criticism against a Jewish journalist. It was a criticism against a French journalism with a very East European sounding name, which is not the same thing at all, as you can imagine. It might actually be even worse in a sense. So I was very strongly criticized also so for different reasons. First, because I write in a certain way, which, how could I put it? In a very direct way. I don't believe in objectivity, as we say in French, objectivité, in the fact that you can, almost like a computer in a very cold way, impartial, exactly, that's the good word, that you can in a very impartial way, 100% impartial, describe reality. That's not the way journalism works. Journalism is also about your own experience. When I go to Gaza, and I went there very often, I am a human being with my own experience, with my own flesh and blood, with my fears, with my own, with my fears, with my tears, with my blood, with my own sadness, and with my own joy. And I cannot just erase it and write like a computer. That's not the way journalism works. Then, that being said, you have to write also in an honest way, because I am not on a mission, and I do not respond to an ideological program. I try to write in an honest way, which means, for example, and I've always been very, very careful about this, I always try to speak to persons with whom I do not agree with. So, for example, to settlers, even the most extremist among them, settlers in the West Bank, it's very important for me to hear the way they think. And same thing in Gaza, I meet with people from Hamas, although of course I couldn't possibly share their ideology and their choices. So this is very important. So I write my articles in Le Monde were always very, very, very direct, I try to make them sharp, and I don't try to soften reality. I try to put it like it is. And so many people among our readers, and especially our Jewish readers, were very annoyed by this, and they felt that I was systematically criticizing Israel. To that, I have to add that social medias, and especially Twitter, are right now are like a madhouse. So you know this. I mean, the global polarization of public debate that you see in all our countries, in Spain, in France, in the United States, everywhere, is based also on this disease of social medias. I say disease because I think it hurts very much public debate. Although I am present on those social medias, I see mostly the damage that is done on them. And so most people on social medias, for example, would react. When I was in Israel, they would react to the titles of the article without never reading them. That happened all the time, and that drove me crazy. But I never reacted on Twitter, for example. But they would react to my tweet presenting the article, or to the title of the article itself, and nothing more. So coming back to your reference to my parents, so obviously they spoke from another perspective. So what they were saying, but in a very gentle and, may I add, in a very gentle and loving way, was that they had the feeling sometimes that not that I was being too harsh on Israel, not that I was criticizing Israel too much, but that I was paying more attention on a human level to the Palestinian voices than to the Israeli voices. So this is not exactly the same thing. And I agree with them. I have to tell you, yes, because I think that journalists very often, when they speak of tragedies, how could I put it? Well, the voices that they listen to first are usually the voices of the victims. And when you face the situation of the occupation, well, Israelis are victims when there are terrorist attacks, but on daily basis, the victims of the occupations are the Palestinians. So yes, I did pay attention a lot to their stories, to their sufferings, without I'm not their spokesperson, And it's not my job to accuse constantly someone of doing something, but it's very important to it was very important for me just to use my articles as a mirror for this reality, to reflect it. That's what I would say. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm so I speak too much. The answers are too long, but I hope that you will interrupt me at a point.
Bueno, me cuesta interrumpirte porque es interesante lo que dices, pero es cierto que deberíamos ir un poco rápido porque queremos hacerte muchas preguntas. Voy por la siguiente. En este sentido, cuentas el episodio con un psicólogo rabino con quien tuviste un encuentro muy agradable, un psicólogo rabínico, con quien tuviste un encuentro muy agradable mientras estabas buscando piso para alquilar en Jerusalén. Pero pocos días después recibiste un email de él donde decía: Smolar, es usted nauseabundo. Qué suerte he tenido de que no haya alquilado mi apartamento. Y es usted judío. Vergüenza debería darle. Sus antepasados estarán revolviéndose en sus tumbas y no tardarán en hacérselo saber. Bueno, usted supone que esta imprecación fue lanzada a partir del artículo que escribiste en Le Monde para el informe de Breaking the Silence sobre la operación militar en Gaza en 2014. Por si alguno de los asistentes que tenemos aquí no lo sabe, me gustaría que explicaras qué es Breaking the Silence y también qué explicabas en ese artículo que podía ofender tanto a este psicólogo rabínico de Jerusalén. Por favor.
Yes, that was truly an incredible encounter with him, because it was at the very beginning of my stay, and I wasn't careful enough, and I opened up in a way to a stranger, and I shouldn't have. So I spoke about my Jewish origins, and right away I had the proof that I shouldn't, because it came back to me flying like a boomerang in my face. So the articles that I mentioned it was actually a double page and the front page of Le Monde. So it was really very, very big articles, a few articles published in my newspaper. And Breaking the Silence is a very important NGO that was founded by former soldiers, Israeli soldiers, in order to document and collect testimonies of other soldiers who are still serving about the occupation and about the wars in Gaza. People, the former soldiers who run these organizations, I must tell you, I'm full of admiration for them, because they work in a very hostile environment. They were targeted. They were designated as enemies of the state, basically. They were labeled as foreign agents. And I think that what they're doing is tremendously important. And as long as they exist, their existence is a proof that civil society and Israeli democracy exist and are vibrant. And the day that Breaking the Silence will cease to exist, it will be a very, very dark day in the history of Israel. And so what this NGO did in 2014 is collect dozens of testimonies of soldiers who were deployed during the 51 days war in the summer of 2014. And those soldiers, they didn't necessarily talk about crimes that were committed. They spoke about the orders that they were given, the way they were deployed, what they were told to do, and the dehumanization of Palestinians facing them. And what was really important was to learn through those testimonies how not what one or two individuals did, but how the system worked. What the chief of staff and the defense ministry decided to do during this war. And this was really fascinating and appalling, because this really opened the door to accusations of war crimes. And so when I not only wrote about the report, but I also met, of course, with members of Breaking the Silence, and I went to Gaza right away to go back to one of the neighborhoods which was totally erased by the Israeli army. And this neighborhood of Shejaiya is, I mean, I've been to different war zones. For example, I went to Chechnya in 1999 and 2000. So I know what a war zone is, but I must tell you that I had never seen an entire neighborhood erased from the surface of the earth. That was really impressive in a bad way. So that's why we used so much space in my newspaper to talk about this issue, because I think it was very dramatic and very important. And that's why this Jewish psychologist reacted in such a strong way, because yes, it was sort of very, very how could I say, it was very bad for Israel, for the image of Israel, for its reputation, because allegations of war crimes were really were really exposed in my newspaper.
Sigamos un poco en este sentido. Estabas investigando cuestiones sobre doctrina militar y las convenciones de Ginebra sobre el derecho humanitario, vaya, en doctrina militar, quería decir. Y te entrevistaste con un filósofo especialista en ética que trabajaba para el Tzahal, para el ejército israelí, el profesor Asa Kasher, que llevaba trabajando en temas de ética, según dices, desde el año 2000, cuando empezó la primera ola de atentados de la segunda intifada, perdón. Y hablabais del uso proporcional de la fuerza. Y el profesor Kasher te dijo, en nuestro grupo de trabajo habíamos tenido discusiones sobre el tema de la proporcionalidad. Llegamos al número pi, 314. 3 palestinos muertos por cada israelí iba bien, 4 no. Algunos dijeron 10 por 1, otros 1 por 1. Me negué a participar en esta discusión amoral, dice el profesor Kasher. Esto es muy fuerte, ¿no? Quiero decir que... ¿Puedes decir algo de esto?
Obviously. Of course, it is very, very shocking. You have to put this into perspective. Let me explain to you how this worked. The Israeli army during the second Intifada used drones to kill Hamas representatives, some Hamas officials. And so the idea that appeared at that time was, how do you shoot those Hamas officials while they are in a civil zone, surrounded by civilians? What is the acceptable price in order to kill a meaningful target? It's a very important issue, and others have faced it. For example, Americans in Afghanistan, they faced the same issue. And so we know this perfectly well. And at that time, the Israeli army and the government decided to gather specialists of the law in order to study this issue and to write a sort of new doctrine. What is the acceptable price to be paid in order to achieve our military goals? The issue had already been raised during the second war in Lebanon in 2006. At that time already, Israel introduced the notion that, how could I put it in a metaphor? If the enemy slaps me, I'm going to cut his hand. So the use of force should be disproportionate in order to avoid any repetition in the future, in order to avoid that the fact that the enemy might strike me back again. And this idea of disproportionate force has been at the very center of the way Israel has been dealing with Palestinian violence. It's not about excessive force here or there. It's about the choice of excessive force in order to avoid further damage for Israelis. And this is very important to understand, that this was at the heart of the discussions that were led with this philosopher, this Asa Kasher that you mentioned.
Vamos a cambiar un poco de tema. Cuentas que Ansel Pfeffer, que es un periodista de Haaretz, es el periódico israelí de referencia a la izquierda, te invitó a cenar una noche de Shabbat y te preguntó si conocías el Kiddush, perdón. El Kiddush es una oración que se hace para bendecir el vino. Y tú dijiste que no. Y Ansel te suelta: eres de verdad el judío más ignorante que conozco. Y esa frase te provocó, te hizo hacer la siguiente reflexión. No la digo toda porque es un poco larga. Quiero decir que todas las frases que extracto son un poco recortadas porque si no sería muy largo todo, ¿no? Bueno, la frase que te dijo Ansel Pfeffer fue: ¿se puede ser judío siendo tan ignorante? ¿Pero ignorante de qué? ¿Es algo de naturaleza religiosa y o cultural? ¿Se puede ser judío a pesar de uno mismo de manera pasiva? Han pasado por lo menos 2 años desde que escribiste esto, supongo, y la pregunta que te quiero hacer es si hay algún matiz nuevo en este hilo de reflexiones. ¿Cómo ves ahora esta cuestión?
It's a complicated question because the book for me seems far away already. The book that I wrote, it was only published. It's a tremendously important book for me, and for also I think for my family, and also as a sort of heritage that I will leave. And the book is dedicated to my son because of this. So, but at the same time, so much has happened in the last year and a half, as we all know. And this is the reason why I'm sitting right now in Paris and I'm not there with you. The COVID crisis has kind of put everything upside down and forced me to get out of this book phase much faster than I thought, because I had to move on in a way. And I would be lying to you if I told you that those questions about Jewish identity are something that follow me every day. That's something that I think about a lot. It's not true. I don't. I speak about, I talk about them when I talk to you, when I'm asked questions about the book, then yes. But otherwise, I'm sort of very at peace with myself and with my multiple identities. And I'm not, you know, I'm not the kind of guy who, you know, ask himself, who checks his heartbeat every 30 seconds and or his fever, and who asks himself, who am I, where am I going? That's not the way I actually work. But at the same time, I was incredibly moved when the book came out in France. I had lots of different meetings with readers and people interested in those issues. And not only in Paris, I traveled a lot in the regions, in different cities, and even small, really small towns. And those meetings were incredibly moving for me, because almost every time, at the end of those conferences, a few people would come to me with a smile and speak to me in a very, very soft, gentle voice and say, "Thank you so much. I'm also a bad Jew." And it was like really incredible. It was as if this title had become a sort of flag under which different people would gather. And I don't think it's linked to the quality of the book that you may or may not find in it. I think it's much bigger than that. I think that this book, especially in Europe, came out at a really good time, at a time where there is a drift, there is or maybe rather a rift between, there is a sort of separation between the diaspora and Israel. I think that many Jews from abroad feel a special link to Israel, obviously, because very often they have families there, some of them have lived there, and it's the home of the Jewish people. But so much has happened in the last 10, 15 years that many millions of Jews from the diaspora, especially in the United States, do not recognize anymore the face of Israel. They don't like the way the country is turning into a more radical and more ethnico-religious country. And so when the book came out, I think it spoke to a lot of Jews from the diaspora who do not want to be blackmailed into a blind support of Israel, whatever the Israeli government does. And to answer your question, I feel I haven't changed my mind at all compared to what I wrote 2 years ago in the book. I feel exactly the same, and I would even say I feel even stronger after meeting all those people and hearing their stories. I think that I struck a nerve with this book, and which was very comforting for me, even psychologically, because when I wrote the book, I was very lonely. It was a very lonely process. I only showed it first to my wife, then to my parents, but I didn't know what I was writing. I didn't know if it was, not only if it was good, but if it made sense, because I tried to put together different stories, different countries, different periods, my family with the fate of Israel and what happened in the Minsk ghetto. It was a puzzle that was complicated to assemble.
Eso es lo que me gusta precisamente, todo el aspecto fragmentario del libro es un verdadero mosaico. Hablemos un poco de historia tal vez, ¿no? O sea, me gustaría centrarnos, porque no nos queda mucho tiempo, centrarnos en tu padre y tu abuelo. Ambos se vieron obligados a exiliarse de la Polonia comunista. Piotr Smolar, tu abuelo, fue un héroe del gueto de Minsk, contribuyó a salvar 10.000 judíos, fue periodista y escritor en yiddish y director del Comité Central de los Judíos en Polonia. La historia de tu abuelo, tú cuentas un hombre escindido entre dos filiaciones, el compromiso con el judaísmo a través de la cultura yiddish y el compromiso con el comunismo. Fue un ferviente comunista, confiando que el comunismo resolvería la cuestión judía, pero fue excluido del Partido Comunista en 1968 precisamente por ser judío. Y posteriormente se exilió a Israel a pesar de ser antisionista. Ahora sí te pido que nos hables del antisemitismo del régimen comunista en Polonia, porque hay muchas cosas que no conocemos bien, que no se conocen bien. Yo por lo menos las descubrí con tu libro y por supuesto de Piotr Smolar.
Okay, so actually the two questions are of course linked, because as you mentioned, my grandfather Piotr Smolar, who was born in 1905 in the east of Poland, he at the age of 11 he was already involved into politics, which sounds incredible today, but at that time it was possible. He was working in a factory, and at the same time he was already a red activist, and the communism was really the passion of his life. He studied in a Soviet institute in Moscow, and he became a Comintern agent in a way. So he was an agent of the communist propaganda in Eastern Europe, and he went twice to prison because of that before the Second World War, and he had a lot of experience of underground. And I think it helped him a lot when in June 1941, he ended up in the Minsk ghetto after walking for 400 kilometers from the Polish city of Białystok. So he, after the war, after all the suffering in the Minsk ghetto, where he really played a very important part along with other activists, because they developed the resistance inside the ghetto. And thanks to this network, they saved, as you mentioned, around 10,000 Jews who managed to escape from the ghetto, and a lot of them joined the partisans who were fighting in the forest around the city of Minsk, which is the capital of Belarus today. So at that time, he was really a hero in a way. And after the Second World War, he became, let's say, a communist bureaucrat. So he was he became the head of the Jewish representative institution in Poland, and he ran a very important newspaper, sort of journal, written in Yiddish, and one of the most influential in the Yiddish intellectual world in the Soviet space. And he really believed in communism more than in anything. At the same time, he was very, 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 he had a very strong desire to defend Jewish culture, not religion, but Jewish culture, and especially Yiddish language. And he really fought for it. But he became, as many in his case, in his generation, totally schizophrenic. Why? That's your first question. Because of anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism became an official policy in Poland, unfortunately. You have to remember that just after the Second World War, the Soviet Union, because all the orders came from Moscow, obviously, but just after the Second World War, the Soviet Union supported Israel at the very beginning, and the Israeli and the Zionist cause. But when Israel took its place in the Western, in the, let's say, pro-American camp, that's when the Soviet Union joined forces only with the Arab countries against Israel. And what happened very quickly was that there was a very sad play on words, in a way, in the Soviet Union and in Poland, is that they never said that they were anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic. They always spoke about cosmopolitism, or in Poland about anti-Zionism. They say, no, we're not against Jews. We're against Zionists, because Zionists have another project than communism, and it's not compatible. But of course, everyone knew what was happening. The communist regime was opening doors to Polish Jews in order for them to leave the country. They say, leave, please go wherever you want. Go to Israel if you want, go wherever you want. And this was very dramatic for my grandfather, because as a communist bureaucrat, but also as a Jew, he thought that a Jewish community was sustainable in Poland, that it should exist, it should be preserved and defended. And it took him a long time before realizing that he was schizophrenic, and you could not reconcile those two trends. And so when my father, Alexander, and my uncle, my father's brother, they both went to prison in '68 during the youth movement in Poland, then my grandfather realized that it was the end of the road. And so he wrote to the head of the Communist Party at the time, and he said, okay, please free my sons, and I'm ready to leave Poland. And actually, so my father came out of prison, but my grandfather left Poland just a few years later, and he decided to go to Israel, which was really odd, which was really strange for him, because he was never a Zionist, never. But Israel became his harbor.
Me gustaría que habláramos también de tu padre, pero desde otra perspectiva. Bueno, tu padre fue militante por la causa democrática en Polonia, también fue encarcelado, fue encarcelado en el 68, se exilió posteriormente en Francia y fue una figura importante del movimiento democrático polaco en el exilio. Incluso tras la caída del régimen comunista vuelve a Polonia como asesor del primer gobierno democrático. Tu padre decidió luchar por Polonia por encima de todo, por la democracia en Polonia, sin ser del todo indiferente a su herencia judía. Cuéntame un poco esta historia, porque tu padre no te transmitió ni a ti ni a tu hermana, como ya has dicho, ningún sentido, ningún relato familiar ni colectivo referente al judaísmo. ¿Puedo citarte antes unas palabras que dice tu padre? Dice: no es fácil explicar la identidad judía a los niños, y menos cuando no hay gran cosa que te ate. Desgraciadamente no sé prácticamente nada de la cultura judía, tampoco de la religión. Israel no me es indiferente, pero tampoco particularmente cercano. ¿De qué habría podido hablar a mis hijos? ¿De la historia dramática de los judíos? ¿De su fidelidad a la religión que no conocía? ¿Del Holocausto? ¿Cómo explicar que tenía, al menos simbólicamente, pero también un poco en relación con el mundo, que tenía que ser fiel a mi herencia judía? Un poco esta contradicción es estimulante, esas zonas de grises que estábamos hablando antes, ¿no? Nada etnicista.
Where do you see a contradiction?
No contradicción, sino hay como un apego de algo que no han seguido, que no han continuado trabajando y que les cuesta soltar, que no lo sueltan. No es una contradicción, es simplemente como algo que no puedes esquivarlo, ¿no? Que no puedes simplemente decir, bueno, ya está, it's over.
Yes. Well, in defense of my father, if I may, I have to underline the fact that his own father, my grandfather, did not teach him the language. He could have, because my grandfather worked in Yiddish. He spoke Yiddish and he worked in Yiddish, but somehow he decided, maybe for my own father's sake, that it would be best if he did not learn Yiddish. Now you have to ask yourself why. Well, in those communist times, maybe, I don't know, because I never spoke to him about it, but maybe my grandfather didn't want my father to be an easy target, to be clearly identified as being Jewish because he spoke the language. I don't know. Or maybe he wanted him to find his own path and to make his own choices. That's also possible. So ignorance, yes, but let me add something. That I think that there are as many ways of being Jews as there are Jews. So there is no easy, clear-cut definition.
Totalmente.
So this is what's so amazing and so incredible about it. And I like to think that there is a path, that there is a Jewishness which is not religious, which is not necessarily full of religious or cultural references, which doesn't necessarily mean that on Friday night you sit for Shabbat. But there is another path which I think it's a humanistic path, which is about values, which is about transmission, which is about respect, which is about the capacity to hear other people's voice and other people's experience. And this is, for me, something fundamental that I received from my parents, because those human values, very strong values, and the sense of right and wrong,
Uy, ¿se ha cortado? ¿Se ha cortado, Piotr?
Oh.
Te he perdido un rato. Oh. The sense of right and wrong, you were saying.
Yes, I was talking about my parents at the most dramatic time I was cut off. So no, I was saying that I was forever in debt to my parents, because what I received from them is this notion of values of transmission, values of this idea of right, that there is a right and there is a wrong, and that this is also, I think, in a way, a form of Jewishness, which is very important.
Sí, justo, bueno, esto es avanzarme mucho. La verdad es que estamos muy mal de tiempo, pero veo que hay pocas preguntas, entonces me permito alargar un poco más. Con el permiso de todos, me permito alargar un poco más. Precisamente, tú hablas de una de las personas que describes con más admiración de tu libro. Es una mujer, bueno, una de las poquísimas mujeres que aparecía en tu libro, por cierto, permíteme decirlo, que es la rabina Tamar Elat Applebaum, del movimiento Masortí. Para quien no sepa, el movimiento Masortí es un movimiento religioso judío que se llama tradicionalista, pero que está lejos de los ortodoxos. Tú describes que la definición que te dio la rabina Applebaum respecto a los deberes que conciernen a los judíos te perturbó, abrumó, no sé bien cómo traducirlo, dijiste troublé. Háblanos un poco de esos deberes según la rabina, porque yo creo que tiene que ver con lo que estás hablando de values, ¿no? De valores, perdón.
She's an incredible woman. She's a fascinating woman with an incredible charisma, and she's really one of the leading figures right now in Israel of, let's say, reformist Judaism. She's a rabbi. She has a lot of followers, and she's an incredible human being. And I was really moved by our discussions, and she's very inspiring. And what Tamar basically says is that Israel is not the end of the road. Is that Israel is not the end of the Jewish history, and that after having wandered around the world like a diaspora for 2,000 years, the fact that Israel was created, does not mean that it's time to put down our luggage. What does she mean by putting down our luggage? She says that the very essence of the Jewish faith is to carry luggage with questions, existential questions about our place in the world, about what is good, what is evil, what is right, what is wrong, and that those questions are exactly what defines us, and that we should never put this luggage down, because this would be a sort of betrayal of who we are and where we came from. And this is absolutely, I mean, for me, this was absolutely a fascinating discussion. And this is why I really emphasized it in the book, because I think she gave me a key in order to understand what I talked previously about, is this separation, this sort of divorce between the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, and Israel today, because a lot of people in the Jewish diaspora around the world, and especially in the United States, they carry this luggage. Israel, they are not fanatics of Israel. They are patriots of Israel in a way. They are very attached to Israel. They have a special link with Israel, but they are not fanatics of Israel at any cost. And they are not ready to put down the luggage and just forget about where we came from and who we are. Because I think that Jewishness is also about universal values and not only about a narrow political or religious identity.
Bueno, son y media. Tenemos 3 preguntas. Una sola más. Te voy a hacer solo una pregunta más y luego pasamos a las preguntas de la gente, que no sé las que son, pero bueno. A ver, el gobierno nacionalista en Polonia está intentando lavar los crímenes antisemitas cometidos por polacos durante la Shoah e incluso más tarde, como el programa en Kielce, ¿no? A nosotros, cuando digo nosotros me refiero un poco a judíos progresistas, vinculados a JCall, nos inquieta mucho las relaciones entre Israel, Polonia y también Hungría, que tienen en común que son gobiernos nacionalistas y populistas. Y en el caso de Hungría, además, claramente antisemita. Creo que más que en Polonia, ¿no? ¿Qué opinas de estas relaciones peligrosas de Israel con estos países o con estos gobiernos?
Okay, so first let me say, as right now my job at Le Monde is to write about diplomatic issues, and from this perspective I can tell you that there is, in general, foreign policy is not about morality and it's not about ethics. Foreign policy is about defending your country's interest in a very, very complicated world right now. So Israel is defending its own interest, and we shouldn't expect from Israel a moral foreign policy because no one has one. No one. So this is the first, yes?
Pero son gobiernos con políticas antisemitas. Es decir, Hungría viene de un...
Yes, I know, but again, but I'm being the devil's advocate now for a change, and it's very comforting. Let me answer to your remark. Yes, why does the Israeli government have this special link with those countries? Because the Israel government for a very long time has been doing just as Russia or China. They have been playing on European divisions. And they know that we are not united enough, especially on foreign policy issues. And they are using Poland and Hungary as a Trojan horse within the EU. This is what they are doing. They are using those countries in order to weaken the European position edicted in Brussels. They don't want Brussels to be very, very strongly critical of Israeli policies and of the occupation. And this is what they're doing by forging a sort of special relationship with Warsaw and Budapest. They know that they can block any initiative in Brussels which would be perceived as being anti-Israelis. So this is basically what they're doing. Then, again, as a devil's advocate, I will tell you the following: that there are anti-Semitic elements in Hungary, for example, when they launch a dreadful campaign against George Soros, an absolutely disgusting campaign against him on billboards, etc. And the Israeli press has written about this a lot. But Viktor Orban, for example, from what I understand, has done a lot for the Jewish community in Budapest also. From what I understand, he has invested quite a bit of money in order for them to thrive and to develop the structures, etc. So, complicated reality. Aretz, for example, run very long pieces on this, on the Hungarian right and the Jewish community. Same thing in Poland. Yes, anti-Semitism is going crazy since the Peace Party has taken over again a few years ago with Kaczynski at its head. But do Polish officials say anti-Semitic things? Not really. What they have done is open the doors to hatred, which is not the same thing. They have created an atmosphere of intolerance, of political violence, in which anti-Semitism thrives. But themselves, it's hard to find anti-Semitic words in their mouth. You understand? It's a small nuance, but I'm just saying this to explain the Israelis' position.
Bueno, lo mismo nos está pasando en España con Vox, precisamente. Creo es muy interesante, creo que deberíamos pasar a las preguntas. Verás que me da pena pasar porque tengo muchas preguntas ahí almacenadas y bueno, y algunas como de actualidad, ¿no? Pero bueno, vamos a pasar a las preguntas. Daniela, ¿podrías leerlas? Estoy un poco cansado de hablar. No se te oye, Daniela.
Ok, ahora sí, ¿no?
Sí.
Ahora sí. D'acord. Estan the question in English? Should I say it in English, Daniel?
Sure.
But I asked Daniel because he is the... Okay. Alan Asaguri. Are the Palestinian victims only because of Israel or also, and maybe to a similar degree, because of the Palestinian leaders?
Okay, let me answer to this right away. Yes, absolutely yes, 100% yes. And I've written dozens of articles about this. The Palestinian political system is totally rotten. It is inefficient, it is corrupted, and it's not working at all. And there is a great lack of democratic legitimacy. You saw that once again, Mahmoud Abbas, the president, promised that there would be elections. And once again, they are finding an excuse, the fact that the elections cannot take place in East Jerusalem in order to postpone the elections. So yes, of course, the Palestinian political leaders bear a great responsibility. And when you speak to people on the street in the West Bank, you can feel the frustration, the incredible anger against their own leaders, because they feel they feel that they are misrepresented, and that those leaders have confiscated the wealth and the power. But also they feel betrayed because Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority have agreed to collaborate with Israel on the security level. The security service of Israel and of the West Bank, they work together like this on daily basis. They exchange information, they arrest people because they have common interests. And for example, common interest is to avoid any serious Hamas implementation in the West Bank. So they are working together all the time. So a lot of frustration among Palestinians, but again, and this is not only a matter of opinion, this is a matter of international humanitarian law. When you have a situation of occupation, it's the occupant who bears the greatest responsibility, the legal responsibility. Israel is the occupant, and it has been the occupant for decades. Occupation was supposed to be a temporary area, a temporary solution. Look how long the temporary solution has become. And now we're moving to annexation in a way. Also, although it's a rampant annexation for now, they don't speak about it so openly. They don't say that this should be the future, because this has very, very dramatic consequences. Nevertheless, this is where we're heading. So yes, sure, the Palestinian leaders bear a lot of responsibility, but the first major responsibility lies on the occupant.
Okay, then Alan Asaguri again. The world has a tendency to blame Israel, and by transitivity the Jews, of almost anything Israel does. People critical of Israel love to leverage your criticism of Israel as a way to delegitimize Israel, even in the good things it may do. How can you deal with it?
That's a very important question, because this is exactly what I was talking about regarding a lot of Jews in the diaspora who feel trapped between two hammers. One hammer is the hammer of the Israeli right, who says, stand along with us, stand by our side, because Israel is your home. Do not criticize us, because we are one family. Otherwise, you will betray Israel. And the other hammer is the hammer, of course, of all the extremists, of the anti-Semitists, the anti-Semitists who very often hide behind anti-Zionism. They say, no, 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 I have nothing against Jews, but I'm against Israel or I'm against Israeli policies. So yes, you're right. It's very hard to separate the different the different speeches. It is hard. I understand that. But does it mean that we should all shut up and never speak about what Israel does or does not? We should not speak about Israel's responsibility facing a population of millions of Palestinians, denying their political rights. We should not just. We should do you think we should hide our head in the sand because we fear the consequences? I don't think so. And I think that Israel's existence right now is not under immediate and direct threat. It is not. It is surrounded by enemies. There are enemies. In the north, there is Hezbollah with more than 100,000 missiles that could be used. You have Syria, of course, not just next door. You have Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in the south. So yes, they are enemies. But right now, I don't see it. And many Israeli officials agree with me, especially military officials. There is no immediate direct threat, existential threat on Israel. Although, of course, they talk a lot about Iran as the main threat in the region. So what we see actually, it's a very, for the last year, is something very new that didn't exist at when I was in Israel. There's a double tendency. First, no one cares anymore about the Palestinians. I mean, let's face it, even if Joe Biden became president, it really sounds like game over for the two-state solution. We have to be realistic. Who is ready to step up today and defend the two-state solution, which sounds more and more like a language of the past that has failed? And I don't see an alternative to this. But nevertheless, this is the common feeling right now. So no one really cares about the Palestinians, and you can see it during the first months of Joe Biden's administration. Do you have the feeling that they have invested in this any political capital? Not at all. They don't. They want this to be kept as a low-level crisis. That's all, and they know they are not going to resolve it. So this is one tendency, and the other tendency at the same time is really remarkable. It's the Abraham Accords between Israel and Sunnite Arab countries. And this is really fascinating because this breaks the logic that existed for decades. And the logic was that there will be no peace with Arab countries if there is no peace with the Palestinians. So things are moving really, really very fast. And because this reality is changing, we should really feel comfortable and speak up and say and describe reality as it is, and not fear consequences or the way our words will be exploited.
Okay, the next question is in Spanish. Nadie se cuestiona la existencia de países como Japón, Francia o Uruguay. ¿Se sigue cuestionando la existencia de Israel? Y si es así, ¿cómo podemos criticar fuera de la comunidad judía al gobierno sin de alguna forma debilitar el Estado?
But you're not weakening the state of Israel if you criticize its government. I don't understand the logic. Why would you be? I think that Israel has become a mature state in a way. Mature meaning that it should be also considered as a normal state, existing with structures, with institutions, with a vibrant civil society, with laws, and that in this respect, it's not threatening there's no threat for the existence of Israel if you criticize its government. Why would there be? I just don't understand this logic. But I think that Israel should be held accountable for certain things. and I'm not going to go into specifics because I think this is not the proper place, time, etc. But I think it's an important discussion to have. I heard, for example, the different democratic candidates in the United States speak about, during the last presidential campaign, speak about conditionality regarding military aid to Israel. They say, okay, we have a special relationship with Israel, and we put on the table $40 billion for 10 years, and that's fine. This is very important because Israel is our strategic ally, but at certain conditions, and we should hold Israel accountable for certain things it does. Why should it be wrong? I understand I understand this logic, and I think this question is going to be on the table in a much wider way in the next few years.
The next one is not a question, it's just an appreciation for you. It says, sorry, creo que tú eres un buen judío, en mayúsculas. Sostienes la crítica y la autocrítica hasta tus últimas consecuencias. El judaísmo ha sido siempre el síntoma molesto de la humanidad por este rasgo, esencia de la ética. Gracias. Es una apreciación de Daniela Aparicio. Después sí, hay una última pregunta. Anónimo. A very paranoid question. Do you think Israel's secret foreign policy is to foster anti-Semitism abroad in order to attract Jews to Israel and thereby pursue occupation?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Okay. Do you think he said that it's a very paranoid question, okay? Do you think Israel's foreign policy is to foster anti-Semitism abroad in order to attract Jews to Israel and thereby pursue occupation?
No, that's paranoid, and that's really unfair and not based on facts. Imagining that Israelis would want to put oil on the fire of anti-Semitism, for me doesn't make any sense. Anti-Semitism is a disease which victims are Jews. So no, I would not say that. Then, of course, Israel has always welcomed Jews choosing Aliyah and who are moving to Israel. They have always done that. That's why 1 million Jews or half Jews came from the ex-Soviet Union countries. And that's why a lot of Jews are coming from Ukraine since the last war in 2014. That's why a lot of Jews came from France this last few years. Sometimes France was even at the top of the countries with 6,000 Jews per year. So, of course, Israeli officials have always opened their arms to those Jews from Europe. And, you know, it's fine by me. I'm not shocked. Of course, they would welcome Jews who want to move. I know from experience that a lot of Jews, European Jews who move to Israel, move for very different reasons. Some of them for economic reasons also, because there are fantastic opportunities in Israel, because Israel's economy has been booming, because the innovation, the IT sector is incredible, and many of them find their opportunities that they don't have in Europe. So again, I'm fine with that, and I'm not shocked by this.
Está todo, ¿no? Bueno, hemos excedido un poco, muy poco, el tiempo previsto. No creo que dé tiempo a más preguntas porque se me quedan, son un poco largos, que es el tema del caso Halimi, muy lamentable caso, muy complicado, y tú como francés podías darnos puntos de vista realmente privilegiados, pero no creo que estemos en el lugar, ¿no? En esos momentos, en el tiempo, perdón. Y también quedaba pues el tema de muy reciente de Human Rights Watch, pues acusando el informe de Israeli Authorities on the Crimes of Apartheid and Persecution, que es un tema también espinoso, donde las comunidades judías, por lo menos en Estados Unidos, se han manifestado muy divididas. Piotr Smolar, muchísimas gracias, ha sido muy interesante. Es una pena que el tiempo siempre sea tan corto, no que las respuestas sean largas, pero sí que el tiempo sea corto. Y recomiendo este libro a todo el mundo, realmente, que le interese algo el judaísmo y Israel, pero desde una perspectiva realmente en base a preguntas, no en base a respuestas, sino precisamente en base a preguntas. Es un texto ideal. Bueno, si alguien quiere despedirse de aquí, yo ya me despido. Gracias a todos. Gracias, Piotr. Perdón, tengo un mensaje.
Thank you so much.
Me dicen... dice Bardas,
Thank you so much for listening. And again, I'm really sorry for not being there with you.
Pues nada.
We too.
Pues lo dejamos aquí. Y mucha suerte, Piotr. Espero que sigas haciendo cosas interesantes.
Thank you very much.
Venga, bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Hasta luego.
Thank you so much.
Bye.